So this is the very last recorded lecture for this class, social movements. And it's a fairly recent social movement. You can see the masks, right? So this is someplace in Africa. They are protesting basically 4 lockdown measures. Stay at home, which is what we need now with Delta back again. Stay at home. So social movements fit into the category of collective behavior. It's kind of a leftover pile at the end of the semester. We've looked at groups and formal organizations and bureaucracies, but people do a whole bunch of other strange things. And collective behavior kind of captures those. So it's an activity involving a large number of people, spontaneous, controversial, wide-ranging, hard to explain, transitory. It's like if you want to study schools, schools exist. You're fine. If you want to study riots, you have to wait. If you want to study fashion, you can look at past fashion, but you have to wait for current fashion. You can't, for Black Friday, if you want to study Black Friday, you have to wait for Black Friday. So it's not, or some of the other stuff. My dissertation was on taking cover during a disaster response, basically. So tornado siren comes, do you take cover? Well, we really can't study that behavior until the next tornado comes and the tornado sirens go off again. So it's a little bit more difficult to cover and study, but some of the fascinating things that we do. So you see mid-1970s plaid pants, people standing in line for an iPhone, the Macarena, which I don't remember how to do, and hockey. So this riot is hockey, back in the good old days, when we had riots when hockey teams won. Now, when I first chose this picture, I really thought it was a G8 summit, like some sort of meaningful protest of some kind, but one of my students was like, nope, that's Vancouver. So it's hockey. They won a hockey game. So that kind of things. So collectivities versus groups, there's limited social interaction. There is some, though. If you go to a concert and you're walking through the mall or something, you can make eye contact, you can nod, you can, yell out a quick something, wave. So there is some interaction, but it's not a long conversation. Not a lot of social boundaries always being observed at those times. And then sometimes some new norms, weak, unconventional norms. People in concerts now have the cell phones with the lights and everything. Back when I went to concerts, it was the lighters, and you would hold the lighters up, and thankfully nobody ever burned anybody else's hair. But new norms. You don't normally just sit around with your lighter, but in that moment, when they're playing that song, it is the perfect thing to do. It is the norm. Collectivities can be localized, crowds, mobs, riots, dispersed, rumors, gossips, public opinions, propagandas, panics, mass hysterias, fashions, and fads. I do have to admit, during Y2K, like 11:30-ish, on New Year's Eve, I backed up my computer. My master's thesis was on that computer, and I really didn't believe in Y2K. I was pretty sure society wasn't going to collapse. I did not stockpile a whole bunch of food and weapons and water and stuff like that. But 11:30-ish, I'm like, just in case, I think I'm going to back up my stuff. So I did. So all of us kind of, we can fit into these things, that behavior. I'm sure I'm not the only person at the last minute going, you know what I should do? Back things up just in case. Social movements fit into this as well because they often start with collectivities. So social movements are organized activities that encourage or discourage social change. And the big key is how much change and who has to do the changing. That is your types. So when you're looking at the typing for the Module 6 assessment, these are the types. So alternative, redemptive, reformative, revolutionary. So alternative social movements are alterative depending on your source. Sometimes the alternative ones are called alterative, revolutionary, or sometimes called transformative, but still the same basic thing, that limited change to specific people. Like my mom belongs to an alternative social movement. They are church-based. They have Bible study every Wednesday at 7 a.m. Bible study. So the movement is there to get people more involved in their communities and build stronger church communities. But if you don't care, you really, especially if you are not Catholic, you do not have to care at all. And even if you're Catholic, you don't really have to care unless you belong to that group. So alternative social movements are kind of they're really isolated in these little groups, and most of the time they're kind of under the radar and nobody really pays that much attention to them. They're not much of a threat. Redemptive social movements are also not a threat. They require more radical change, like Alcoholics Anonymous requires you to stop drinking alcohol, go to meetings a whole lot of times, get new friends, get new way of living your life, new social activities, sometimes even move away from people. So you are undergoing a radical change, but if you don't belong to this group and this isn't you, then you can just be like, whatever, don't care, not part of my group, not threatening at all. But in an individualistic society, we start perceiving to be really, really threatened when we get to reformative social movements. This would be, why doesn't everybody just wear a mask? Remember that from last summer? About a year or so ago, mask ordinances, everybody, limited thing, put a thing on your face when you go to the grocery store, limited thing. Or environmental movements, bring your own bags to the grocery store, don't use water bottles, recycle, quit using straws. Or Martin Luther King, if you have a school or a building or some sort of open to the public type of activity, everybody gets to go, regardless of the color of their skin or their racial or ethnic heritage. Everybody gets to be there. So reformative social movements theoretically are limited change, but everybody is supposed to be doing this. And we as an individualistic society tend to really overreact to reformative social movements. Now, the government is the one that really overreacts to the revolutionary social movements, right? Because revolutionary social movements, by definition, are revolutionary, or the other type you see sometimes is transformative in their place. It's the baby out with the bathwater kind of thing. Beheading the king. The last shall be first. The first shall be last. We are getting rid of the form of government and putting in a completely new one in there. French Revolution, right? Chinese Revolution, Russian Revolution, the Tiananmen Square revolt, what they're doing in Belarus right now with the opposition. What else do we have there? Malcolm X was quite revolutionary as well in his speaking and his words. So revolutionary social movements are opposed by people, but they're also opposed by the government, which we shouldn't be surprised after deviance, right? Anything that threatens capitalism is going to have the boom on them very, very quickly. Other things, there's lots of theories of social movements. We are not going to spend a lot of time here on the theories, but we are going to look at deprivation theory for a second, because you are not going to overthrow your government when you have nothing. You are going to overthrow your government when you don't have enough. You are promised more, you have some, but the rest of it is not coming fast enough. The change is not rapid enough. That's deprivation theory. Or you perceive that you should be getting more than you do for the amount of work that you give. We're having a bit of a workers' movement again, because people are not willing to work for pennies anymore. So lots of restaurants, and especially restaurants and fast food places, grocery stores looking for workers. Resource mobilization theory. You have to have money. You cannot have a revolution without money. You have to have some sort of infrastructure evolving. You can't just decide one day, guess what we're going to do? You have to have some sort of system behind that organization. Some of the stages, they emerge, sometimes with protests, sometimes with riots, sometimes with just a general feeling of discontent. If you look at the women's movement from the 1960s, then they coalesce. Other people are experiencing the same thing that we are. Why don't we get together and see if we can solve this, bring more people together and bring more ideas to the table? The bureaucratization, isn't that a big long word. It's when you get a name and a letterhead and a building and somebody to answer the phone, and you become an entity with bureaucratization. Once you get past that, you've got these 5 options. You either succeed, you fail, you get co-opted by another group, you get repressed, or you go mainstream. And then you decline after that. And then you come back again, because that's usually what you see, especially women's movement, environmental movement, the civil rights movement in its various different forms. Ebb and flow and ebb and flow. They emerge, go through the cycle, decline, re-emerge, go through the cycle, decline. So some of the civil rights legislation from the first civil rights movement, which actually wasn't the first, but it's the 1960s, 50s and 60s civil rights movement, Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which does not functionally exist anymore, and then the Fair Housing Act of 1968. A little bit about the timeline here. Now, the thing to think about, though, with civil rights movement is when you watch documentaries about the civil rights movement, it looks orchestrated. It looks like the bus boycott happened and everybody got along with each other, and then in this great finale, the goal has been reached, right? It always looks scripted in a sense, and they are. But when you're in the middle of it, it's a mess. The Montgomery bus boycott, 381 days. So long. Do we have the patience to go 381 days? I don't know that I do. If I would have the patience to go 381 days, I would have to really feel strongly about whatever this thing is if I were to go 381 days. The student sit-ins, there was some argument about nonviolence versus violence, the distinct, deliberate, that's the word I'm trying to find, deliberate nonviolent strategy used in the sit-ins. The Freedom Summer, what happens after the bus gets burned? Then what do you do? So all of this was messy at the time. It's only 50-ish years later that it gets put into these lovely documentaries that we get to watch, and presentations in museums and everything to make it all make sense. Looks scripted, looks like a movie, the stuff happens, and then the inevitable outcome. But it really isn't that way when you're in the middle of it, right? Because we are kind of right smack in the middle of new civil rights movement, new women's movement, intensified environmental movement, lots of mess going on. And some of the elements of the modern civil rights movement, this is from an LA Times article, the modern civil rights movement relies less on centralized leadership and cooperation with religious organizations. There's a reflection of Black Power movement and lots of social media storytelling, lots of sharing stories, lots of getting things out into the open and into space, really, letting the voices be heard and the individual voices be heard, not just take a poll and then represent the voices, but actually the voices. So lots of social media involved in this. And part of the struggle is that the issues are not quite as easy to solve. I mean, we do need another Voting Rights Act. That would be amazing and wonderful if we could get that. But some of the rest of these things, poverty, imprisonment, institutional racism, police brutality, these are going to be long hauls. These are not easily fixed. Or if they are easily fixed, it's going to be really hard to talk people into it. One of the best things we ever did in years and years and years to end child poverty is what we did like 2 weeks ago. That check to all the parents who have children. Here, $250, you have a kid. That is amazing. That is going to cut child poverty just, I don't want to say in half, but probably even more than in half. I can't remember the statistic for that. That's my bad thing about teaching. I go off on a tangent. It's like, I don't remember where I was going with this. But I do remember reading the statistics that this is the most important bill that can be passed in terms of reducing child poverty. So the possibilities are there. And yes, it is a little bit harder to change quickly with legislation because people don't want to do it, but it doesn't mean that it's impossible. And when it takes a long time, people should be patient. I guess that's the lesson from the 381 days, and I'm not patient. And then the last quote from the article from the LA Times: "This ain't your grandparents' civil rights movement. And when you guys are the civil rights movement, it is yours. You own it. And young women are the women's movement. All of us are the environmental movement. All of you, not necessarily me because I'm old. So you own that movement and all of those. So social change, we look at that. Discoveries and inventions create social change. Technology creates social change. Population changes. I mean, part of the whole labor movement thing is that we had 900,000 excess deaths. I mean, I know the official COVID number is 600,000, but we had 900,000 excess deaths. Who is there to work? You can't just go back after that. When you have that dramatic of a population change, the life expectancy dropped by 1.3, if I remember right. The natural environment changes. That's what we're having with global warming, with climate change, with increased fires across the West, causing haze and bad air quality across the East. Revolution and war, really good at social change. And then ideas, religious ideas, ideas of all men are created equal, ideas of it's only a two-class system. There's just the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. All of these promote social change. And perspectives on change, I was going to say that's it, but there's always one last slide. So if you are a functionalist and you're looking at social change, you're focusing on that dynamic equilibrium. Every change must be balanced. If you change here, you got to rebalance over here somewhere. And then conflict theory looks at who benefits from the changes, because somebody always does. And that is it. Our last video of the entire class.